The clipboard came up before Renata Scholl had finished crossing the corridor. "The family waiting area is back through the atrium, sweetie." Her voice had the particular brightness of someone performing a public service. "This wing is for staff and authorized personnel only." She smiled. It was the kind of smile that believes it is being helpful. Zora Ellington Mbai did not move. She stood near the elevator bank in her camel wool overcoat, the one she'd worn through 3 Chicago winters and 2 international conferences, and looked at the woman with the clipboard and the color-coded lanyard and the laminated site map tucked under her arm like a deed to a property she'd only just acquired. "I know this hospital very well," Zora said. It was a simple sentence. It was also the most accurate thing spoken in that corridor all morning. But Renata Scholl heard it the way people hear things when they've already decided what they're seeing, as pushback. As a visitor who didn't understand the new system, she reached for her radio. Mercy Presbyterian Medical Center had been built in 2 phases. The original structure went up in 1987, 6 floors of limestone and glass on the north side of the city, named for a woman who had donated her estate on the condition that the charity ward remain free. The East Wing came later, in 2004, an expansion project that required gutting 3 floors of the original building and rerouting the cardiac surgery suite to a new location on the 4th floor. The woman who had consulted on the surgical suite's layout, who had stood in a half-constructed room with blueprints spread across a folding table and argued successfully for a wider instrument bay and a secondary scrub sink positioned closer to the bypass machine, was now being asked to find the atrium. She had walked into the hospital through the main entrance 20 minutes earlier, the way she always did when she wasn't on the clock. No badge on the outside of her coat, no white coat, nothing that announced her to the room. She had nodded to the volunteer at the information desk, who had nodded back. She had passed the pharmacy kiosk, the coffee cart with the hand-lettered specials board, the framed photographs of the hospital's founding staff that lined the wall near the chapel corridor. She had walked this hallway for 19 years. The East Wing addition had been completed during her 2nd year as attending. She remembered the smell of fresh drywall compound and the sound of the construction crew's radio drifting up through the ventilation shafts while she was trying to close a chest on the 3rd floor. She remembered the first time she used the new scrub sink and thought, good placement. None of that was visible to Renata Scholl, who had arrived 8 months ago with a new title, a reorganization mandate, and a laminated site map. "I'm going to need to call security to escort you back to the waiting area," Renata said. She said it the way people say things they believe are reasonable. Zora said nothing. There is a specific kind of silence that people who have spent decades in operating rooms learn to carry. The silence of someone who has held a heart in her hands and understood that panic is the enemy of precision. It is not passive. It is not submission. It is the silence of a person who knows exactly where she is and has decided that this moment does not require her to prove it. Renata made the call. Harriet Vaughn came around the corner from the cardiac floor stairwell at the moment the radio crackled. She was 58 years old and had worked this hospital since the original building was the only building. She had seen 6 administrations, 4 accreditation reviews, 2 floods in the basement records room, and every variation of institutional reorganization that a mid-sized urban hospital could produce. She had been charge nurse on the cardiac floor for 22 years, which meant she had also seen Zora Ellington Mbai walk this corridor more times than she could count. She caught Zora's eye. 1 beat. 2. Then Harriet turned and walked back the way she had come, back toward the nurses' station, moving with the quiet efficiency of someone who had somewhere specific to be. To anyone watching, it might have looked like indifference. It was not. But Zora didn't see where Harriet went. She was watching the elevator indicator light, a habit, the same reflex that had made her good at reading monitors, when her phone buzzed against her palm inside her coat pocket. She pulled it out. The screen read, OR Scheduler/Mercy Cardiac. A staffing ping. Probably a schedule adjustment, a room change, something that could wait 20 minutes while she walked up to the 4th floor and said hello to Kwame. She silenced it and put the phone back in her pocket. The security guard arrived from the south corridor. He was young, newer than the East Wing, and he had the expression of someone who had been given instructions he wasn't entirely comfortable with. Renata Scholl folded her arms. It was a small gesture, contained, the gesture of someone who believes the situation has been correctly resolved. As the security guard arrived and Renata folded her arms with quiet satisfaction, Zora removed her hand from her coat pocket, and for 1 second, her fingers brushed the inner lining where the thoracic surgery crest is stitched, before she turned and walked calmly toward the atrium, leaving the corridor to a woman who does not yet know what she has just done. If you believe the truth always finds its way to the surface, that competence doesn't disappear just because someone refuses to see it, then you already know how this story ends. But the how matters. The details matter. Stay with us, because every chapter of this story is built on things that actually happened in rooms like this one, to people like her. And the reckoning, when it comes, is quieter and more permanent than you might expect. If that's the kind of story you come here for, you're in the right place. Subscribe, because the people who keep coming back to this channel are the ones who understand that dignity doesn't announce itself. It just keeps showing up. The east stairwell at Mercy Presbyterian had been a construction bypass once, a raw concrete corridor that smelled of joint compound and new pipe insulation, marked with orange caution tape and known only to the contractors, the night custodians, and the surgeons who had nowhere to wait while the building finished becoming itself. Zora Ellington Mbai had learned it during the 18 months the East Wing was going up, when she would climb these stairs between procedures to eat a sandwich on the 4th floor landing because the new cafeteria wasn't open yet and the old one was too loud to think in. She knew every half landing, every place the railing was slightly loose, every door that required a firm shoulder rather than a pull. The building knew her back, it just didn't wear a lanyard. She didn't let herself replay the corridor, not yet. That was a discipline she had built over 2 decades in operating rooms, the capacity to file a thing precisely, close the drawer, and attend to what was in front of her. What was in front of her now was Kwame. Dr. Kwame Asante Briggs's office was the 3rd door on the left, identifiable at a distance by the worn leather portfolio sitting open on the windowsill, where he always left it when he was in the building and didn't want to be interrupted, a signal only his close colleagues knew to read as "come in anyway." Zora knocked once, pushed the door, and found him at his desk with his reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, a printout covered in pencil annotations spread across the blotter. He stood when he saw her. The handshake lasted about a second before it became an embrace, the kind between people who have stood in the same rooms during the same impossible nights and never had to explain it to each other. "You look like you walked here from another time zone," he said, stepping back and studying her face with the clinical attention he applied to everything. "I walked from the atrium," she said, and left it at that. He didn't press. He pulled a second chair close to the desk, and they settled into the rhythm that 20 years of friendship had worn smooth. The way two people talk when they are not performing the conversation for anyone, when the shorthand is so dense it would be nearly unintelligible to an outsider. They talked about the shared patient, a 58-year-old man with a complicated post-surgical course that had required both their departments to coordinate more closely than usual, and about the paper Kwame was revising for CHEST, a longitudinal study on post-COVID pulmonary fibrosis patterns in patients who had also undergone cardiac intervention. Zora had contributed 2 cases to his data set. She asked how the revision was going. "Reviewer 2 wants me to expand the exclusion criteria section," Kwame said, with the particular flatness of someone who has been fighting Reviewer 2 in his head for 3 weeks. "Reviewer 2 always does," Zora said. He laughed. A real one, short and sudden, and for a moment the afternoon felt entirely ordinary. Then he mentioned the retirement dinner. Dr. Phyllis Okafor, the hospital's founding chief of medicine, was stepping down in the spring. There would be a dinner, probably in the atrium, probably in March, and Kwame was on the planning committee and already exhausted by it. Zora said she would be there, that Phyllis had written one of her fellowship recommendation letters, and she owed her at minimum a good speech and a decent bottle of wine. Kwame said Phyllis would want the speech and would give away the wine to the residents. They both knew he was right. It was somewhere in the middle of the retirement dinner conversation that Kwame's gaze moved past her shoulder, toward the open office door, and stayed there a half-second too long. Zora turned to look. Down the hall, Renata Scholl had stopped mid-stride. She was holding her laminated site map against her chest like a shield, and she was listening. Not obviously, not rudely, but with the particular stillness of someone who has just heard a word that rearranges the entire room. The word, Zora would later understand, had been joint commission. Kwame had said it the way he said everything administrative, as an afterthought, a piece of institutional furniture. They're coming sometime next quarter apparently, the accreditation review. I've been told to have my department's outcome metrics in a shareable format by February. He said it and moved on, back to Phyllis's wine preferences. But Renata had already pivoted. The stillness lasted perhaps 2 seconds, and then she was moving. Not the measured, territory-claiming walk of before, but something tighter, more propulsive, aimed at the administrative suite at the far end of the corridor with the purposefulness of someone who has just remembered something urgent. The laminated site map disappeared around the corner with her. Kwame hadn't noticed, or if he had, he didn't remark on it. Zora watched the empty corridor for a moment, then turned back. She did not tell him. She had made that decision somewhere on the back stairwell, without quite knowing she was making it. The same quiet decision she made in operating rooms when something had gone slightly wrong and the priority was the patient on the table, not the accounting of how it happened. There would be a time for the accounting. This was not it. Instead, she listened to him describe Renata's reorganization of the visitor protocols. The new color-zoned lanyards, the laminated maps posted at every elevator bank, the updated signage distinguishing staff corridors from family corridors, the new requirement that all non-badged visitors check in at the main desk before proceeding past the atrium. Kwame described it with the mild, diplomatic neutrality of someone who finds the whole thing somewhat excessive but is not the person who has to implement it. She's very focused on the accreditation preparation, he said. I can see that, Zora said. She let a moment pass. Then, I hope the protocols are being applied consistently. It was the kind of sentence that could mean nothing. Kwame looked at her, and she watched him hear all the things she hadn't said. His expression moved, from warm to careful to something older and quieter. The look of a man who has spent enough time in this institution to understand exactly what kind of afternoon she might have had before she reached his office door. He didn't ask. She didn't offer. That, too, was a language they had built over 20 years. He set his glasses on the desk. He was about to say something. She could see him choosing the words with the care he gave to difficult conversations when the desk phone rang. He answered it, listened for 4 seconds. Then he held the receiver out to her. It's OR scheduling, he said. They've been trying your cell. She had silenced it in the corridor. She had assumed it could wait. She took the receiver. The voice on the other end was clipped and careful in the way that OR coordinators are when they are managing the distance between urgency and panic. There was a situation developing in cardiac OR too. The situation required Zora specifically. Kwame's hand was already on the receiver when the knock came from the other direction. Not the soft knock of a colleague, the knock of someone who had decided the door was a formality. Renata Scholl filled the doorframe with the particular energy of someone who had rehearsed what she was about to say and found it satisfying. She had come from the security desk, that much was clear. What was also clear, to Kwame, who had known Zora for 19 years, and to the 2 residents who had paused their conversation in the hallway, the way young people pause when they sense something institutional is about to happen, was that Renata had not come to apologize. She asked, in a voice that was procedural enough to feel legal, for the visitor to state her name, her purpose in a restricted clinical corridor, and to produce identification. She did not say visitor like an insult. She didn't have to. Zora did not sigh. She did not look to Kwame for rescue. She reached into the interior pocket of her camel overcoat, the same pocket she had brushed in the corridor downstairs, the one with the stitched crest, and produced her hospital credentials without a word. The badge was laminated, institution issued, with her photograph and a gold stripe along the left edge that designated surgical subspecialty credentialing. She held it out with the practiced calm of a woman who had been asked to prove herself in rooms like this one before and had learned that composure is its own form of testimony. Renata took it, examined it, and paused. The pause lasted 3 seconds, long enough to be a choice. Then she said, with the same pleasant procedural tone, that the badge may be outdated. Dr. Ellington Mbai was not on today's posted surgical schedule, and her attire, the overcoat, the dark jeans, the burgundy turtleneck, did not conform to the dress code requirements for credentialed staff present in active clinical zones. She said it clearly. In front of Kwame, in front of two residents who had now stopped pretending they were doing anything else. Kwame set the phone receiver down on the desk without hanging it up. The voice on the other end, the OR scheduling desk, still trying to reach Zora, continued in a thin, tinny thread of sound that no one in the room acknowledged. Renata stepped to one side of the doorframe and began typing on her phone. She typed with the focused economy of someone composing something official, something she intended to have a case number. What she was typing, no one in the hallway could see. What it contained, the phrase unidentified black female in civilian dress, non-compliant with redirection, the timestamp, the corridor location, the notation, potential unauthorized access to restricted clinical zone, would enter the hospital's compliance system the moment she pressed send. Automatically, permanently, logged to a case file that would sit in a server she had no reason to think about again. She had not yet considered that servers do not forget. Zora said nothing. This was not silence born of defeat. It was the silence of a woman who had learned, through years of operating in rooms that had not been built with her in mind, that the most dangerous thing she could do in this moment was give Renata Scholl a reason to feel she had provoked a reaction. The badge had been produced, the credentials were real, the record would speak. And 20 feet around the corner, at the nurse's station, it already was. What the corridor had read as indifference, Harriet Vong's brief eye contact with Zora downstairs, her quiet turn away from the confrontation, her unhurried walk back toward the nurse's station, had been none of those things. She had been counting time of incident, location, the exact words used, the names of the two residents who had been present, the security guard's badge number. She had written it all in the neat block letters that 22 years of charge nursing had made automatic. The handwriting of a woman who understood that institutional memory lives in paper, and that paper submitted before anyone thinks to ask for it is worth more than paper produced in defense. She dated the form. She noted the time. She set it beside her to dry. She would ask the two residents to co-sign it before their shift ended. Neither of the residents knew yet that they were witnesses in a formal sense. They would by end of shift. And in cardiac OR2, one floor down, behind two sets of sealed doors, in a room that smelled of antiseptic and circulated air, a patient was on bypass. The attending surgeon had taken a call outside the scrub room 11 minutes ago and had not come back. His phone was going to voicemail. His backup was in traffic on the 94, 22 minutes out by the most optimistic estimate. The OR team had been trying to reach Zora Ellington Mbayi for 40 minutes. They had tried her cell. They had tried the OR scheduling desk. The scheduling desk had tried Kwame's office line, which was currently sitting off the hook, with a thin thread of voice still coming through it, unanswered. No one upstairs knew any of this yet. Renata looked up from her phone with the composed expression of someone who has just sent a message she believes will end the conversation, and down the hall, a charge nurse rounded the corner at a near run, heading directly for Zora. Her name was Clara Tran, and she had been a charge nurse on this floor for 11 years. She did not run unless running was the only rational option. She was running now, or the closest thing to it that professional composure would allow. And when she reached Zora, she did not apologize for the interruption. She simply began. Cardiac OR2, a patient on bypass, aortic dissection, type A, extending into the root. The scheduled attending had been called to the bedside of a family member 2 hours ago and was unreachable. The backup, Dr. Renfrew, out of the vascular group, had been in a car accident on the 94, was physically uninjured, but 40 minutes away in traffic that was not moving. The OR team had a perfusionist, a scrub tech, 2 residents in the gallery, and a patient whose aorta was failing in real time. They had been trying to reach Zora Ellington Mbayi for 40 minutes. 40 minutes. The number settled in the hallway like something physical. Anyone who had been listening, and 2 residents had been listening, frozen in the doorway of the conference room behind Kwame's office, would have done the arithmetic without being asked. 40 minutes was how long the OR team had been trying. The call Zora had silenced in the main corridor downstairs, the one she'd seen labeled OR Scheduler/Mercy Cardiac on her screen, the one she had assumed was a routine staffing ping she could return after the visit, that call had not been routine. That had been the first attempt. And then there had been others, routed through colleagues, through the pulmonology desk, through Kwame's own office line, working outward through her professional network like a search party fanning across unfamiliar ground. The very presence Renata Scholl had spent an hour attempting to remove from the building was the only reason the patient in cardiac OR2 still had a chance. She shed the coat in one motion. She did not look at Kwame when she handed it to him. She did not look at Renata. Clara Tran had already reached into her scrub pocket and produced a folded surgical cap, the kind of small preparedness that 22 years of institutional memory makes automatic. And Zora took it and pulled it on as she was already moving toward the stairwell. A resident materialized at the fire door and held it open. Zora paused. 1 second, no more. She did not turn fully around. Her voice, when it came, was not raised. It was the voice she used in an OR when she wanted everyone in the room to hear her without anyone feeling shouted at. I designed the protocol on the card inside that OR. Then she was through the door, and the stairwell swallowed the sound of her footsteps, and the corridor was very quiet. Kwame turned to Renata Scholl. He did not raise his voice either. He spoke the way people speak when they want the words to carry their own weight without any help from volume or heat. Dr. Zora Ellington Mbayi, he said, holds the Whitmore Slade Chair in Cardiothoracic Surgery at this institution. The endowed chair, the one named for the 2 surgeons who built this hospital's cardiac program in 1974. She has performed over 2,000 open-heart procedures within these walls. Her work on aortic repair outcomes had been cited in the training curriculum of 4 academic medical centers. And the laminated surgical protocol mounted inside every cardiac OR bay in this building, the card that told every scrub tech, every perfusionist, every resident exactly what to do when the room went critical, carried her name in the bottom right corner. Not a signature, a byline, because she had written it. The 2 residents did not look away from Renata. They were first years, both of them, still in the phase of their training where every senior physician existed as an abstraction, a name on a schedule, a set of initials on a consult note. They had heard Zora say, quietly, in the corridor not 20 minutes ago, that she knew this hospital very well. They had watched Renata examine her badge and suggest it might be outdated. They had watched Zora fold that moment away without comment and continue existing in the building with total, unhurried composure. They were recalibrating everything. Renata stood where she had been standing. The corridor had emptied around her the way rooms empty after something decisive has happened. Not all at once, but in the quiet drift of people who have somewhere else to be and suddenly remember it. Clara Tran was already back at the nurses' station. The residents had retreated. Kwame carried Zora's coat back into his office without another word and closed the door behind him, gently, in the way that is sometimes worse than a slam. Renata walked back to her office. She sat down at her computer. She thought about the afternoon, the protocol she had followed, the badge she had questioned, the message she had sent to Security Administration 40 minutes ago, and she began to type. She was composing an HR complaint. She was building it carefully, procedurally, in the language of policy and documentation. She believed it would reframe the afternoon. She believed it would establish that she had acted within her authority, that the situation had been ambiguous, that any reasonable administrator in her position would have done the same. She was not wrong that the system would receive it. She was not wrong that every word would be recorded. She was wrong about what recording it would mean. Renata walks back to her office, closes the door, and sits down at her computer, and begins typing the HR complaint she believes will reframe the afternoon in her favor, not yet understanding that every word she types is entering a compliance system that does not forget. The surgery took 4 hours and 11 minutes. The patient, a 63-year-old man whose name Zora would not learn until the next morning because that is how she had always done it, name after, not before, survived. The aortic repair held, the bypass came off clean. When the perfusionist called the time and the circulating nurse pulled back the drape, the OR team was quiet for exactly 2 seconds in the way that surgical teams go quiet when something that could have gone wrong didn't. Zora pulled off her gloves at the scrub sink with the same economy she brought to everything. No exhale of relief, no visible ceremony, just the snap of latex, the run of water, and the particular stillness of a surgeon who has learned not to spend emotion she will need tomorrow. Harriet Vong was waiting. She stood just outside the anteroom with 2 paper cups of coffee, one in each hand, the way you hold something for someone you were certain was coming back. She said nothing when Zora emerged. She simply extended the cup and Zora took it. And for a moment, the 2 women stood in the corridor in the kind of silence that does not need filling. Then Harriet reached into the front pocket of her scrubs and produced a folded document, 3 pages. She smoothed it open against her thigh and held it where Zora could see without having to take it. It was an incident report, time-stamped at 2:47 in the afternoon, 11 minutes after Renata Scholl had summoned security, 40 minutes before Renata had returned to her office to compose the email she believed would settle things in her favor. 3 pages, 2 co-signatories, both residents who had been standing in the hallway outside Kwame's office when Renata asked Zora to produce identification in front of them. Every word Renata had said was in there. Every word Zora had not said was in there too, noted as restraint rather than absence. Harriet had submitted it to the hospital's Patient Safety and Equity Office at 3:04 p.m. Renata's HR email had cleared the server at 3:51 p.m. The compliance system, which does not distinguish between the powerful and the procedural, had linked both documents under the same case file by 4 p.m., automatically without anyone asking it to, because that is what compliance systems do when 2 reports reference the same incident window, the same corridor, and the same named individual. Zora read the report standing up, coffee in one hand, and when she reached the final paragraph, Harriet's own notation, written in the careful language of someone who has spent 22 years understanding exactly what institutional memory requires, she looked up. "You went straight to the station," Zora said. Harriet took a sip of her own coffee. "I've been a charge nurse for 22 years, she said. "I know what a paper trail is for." Later, in the family lounge, Zora sat with the overcoat folded beside her and her coffee going cold. She did not touch the lining. She didn't need to. But anyone watching would have understood, in retrospect, why she had touched it that afternoon in the corridor when Renata's clipboard rose like a barrier and the security guard arrived and the room made its assumption without asking a single question. The crest stitched inside that coat, the emblem of the American Association for Thoracic Surgery, placed there by the hands of the mentor who had trained her, was not a credential she wore for other people. It was a private thing, a reminder of who had believed in her before the titles existed. She had touched it the way you touch something true when someone is trying to tell you that you are not. 6 weeks later, the Joint Commission review team arrived. Renata had been preparing for this visit since her first week in the role. The color-coded zone maps, the revised visitor protocols, the laminated signage, all of it had been, in some measure, an architecture built toward this moment. She had prepared a presentation. She had rehearsed answers. She had spent 6 months making herself the kind of administrator whose first annual report would earn a commendation. The review team requested, as part of their standard equity and patient safety audit, all HR and incident reports filed in the prior 90 days. This is standard. This is always standard. Renata knew it was standard. What she had not calculated, could not have calculated because she had not known about Harriet's report when she wrote her own, was that the 2 documents would arrive in the reviewer's folders side by side, linked by the compliance system under the same case file, time-stamped 44 minutes apart, describing the same afternoon from opposite directions. One of the reviewers read the email aloud, not as an accusation, in the flat procedural voice of someone entering evidence into a record. Unidentified black female in civilian dress, non-compliant with redirection. The timestamp, the corridor, the security escort. And then, because the compliance system had linked the files, the reviewer turned the page and noted, also in a flat procedural voice, that on the same afternoon, at the same location, the same individual had been urgently summoned to perform emergency cardiothoracic surgery, and that the documented delay in reaching her had been flagged as a patient safety event. The room was quiet, not the 2-second quiet of a successful surgery, a different kind. Renata Scholl did not lose her position that day. That is important to say plainly, because this is not a story about destruction. The reviewers were not there to punish. They were there to assess. What they assessed was this: An administrator had used institutional language to document a physician as a threat. On the same afternoon, that physician's presence in the building was the margin between a patient's life and death. The accreditation commendation Renata had built her first year around was withheld pending the outcome of a corrective action review. The hospital's equity office opened a formal investigation. Harriet Vong's incident report, 3 pages, 2 co-signatories, submitted before Renata's email had even sent, became the foundational document of that investigation. The laminated zone maps came down from the corridor walls 2 weeks later. No announcement. They were simply gone. In the cardiac surgery wing, a resident taped a small printed note inside her locker. She had overheard Zora say it in the hallway after the surgery, to no one in particular, or perhaps to herself, the way surgeons sometimes speak after a long case, not for an audience, but because the words need somewhere to go. Do the work well enough and the room always calls you back. The resident had written it down on a prescription notepad before she forgot it. Then she had typed it, printed it, and taped it where she would see it every morning before rounds. She was not the only one, but she was the first. 3 months later, Zora was asked to join the hospital's Credentialing and Equity Task Force, a new body created in direct response to the Joint Commission's review findings, and she accepted. Not because she needed the title. She had titles. Not because she needed the validation. The OR had given her that at 7:14 on a Tuesday evening, when the bypass came off clean, and the room went quiet for 2 seconds. She accepted because the work was real, and the work was necessary, and because somewhere in this hospital, right now, there was a woman in a plain coat walking a corridor that did not yet know her name, and Zora intended to change that before the woman ever had to touch the lining of her coat to remember who she was. The institution did not become just in a day. It rarely does. But it had, on a Tuesday afternoon in the space between an administrator's assumption and a surgeon's scrub sink, generated a record. And the record did not forget. That is how it usually works, when it works at all. Not in speeches, not in confrontations, not in the dramatic reversal anyone would have chosen if they were writing the story themselves. In documents, in timestamps, in a charge nurse who went straight to the nurse's station and wrote everything down in neat block letters because she had 22 years of institutional memory and she knew exactly what a paper trail was for. Justice, when it is real, tends to be quiet. It tends to arrive in folders. It tends to be read aloud in flat procedural voices by people who are simply doing their jobs. And the room, in the end, always knows who belongs in it. If this story stayed with you, if you've ever been in a corridor that didn't know your name or stood beside someone who was, drop a comment below. Tell me what you would have done. Tell me what you did do. This community belongs to people who believe the truth always surfaces. And I want to hear from you. If you made it all the way here, you already know what to do. Leave a like so the algorithm carries the story to someone who needs it today. And subscribe, because this is the kind of storytelling we come back to every single week. Thanks for watching. The end screen has more videos in the same world.